In the depths of space, where ancient empires clash and forgotten species struggle for survival, humanity has always been considered the weakest link. We have no natural armor, no telepathic abilities, no centuries-long lifespans. What we do have is something far more dangerous: an inexplicable stubbornness to never let go of those we choose to protect. When Marcus Chen, a human fighter pilot, crash-landed on the dying world of Valthera, he expected to find death waiting in the crimson mists. Instead, he found something worse: Princess Lyralii of the Nixai, the last of the vampire nobility, slowly fading into eternal darkness as her ancient bloodline finally reached its end. What happened next would shake the foundations of 3 galactic empires and prove that sometimes, the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology or magic, it's the simple human refusal to let someone die alone. This is the story of how one man's blood created a bond that neither death nor destiny could break, and how a dying princess discovered that some chains are worth wearing forever. The crimson mist of Valthera swirled around Marcus Chen's crashed fighter like the dying breath of a wounded god. Emergency lights flickered weakly in his cockpit, casting dancing shadows across shattered instrument panels and sparking wires. The impact had driven his ship deep into what looked like ancient ruins, massive stone columns carved with symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. Marcus groaned as he struggled against his restraints, his left shoulder screaming in protest. The crash had been unavoidable once the Zephyrian cruisers had disabled his hyperdrive. He'd managed to take down 2 of their fighters before his ship finally gave out, but that small victory felt hollow now. His emergency beacon was dead, and even if it weren't, no human rescue ship would venture this deep into the contested zone. Blood trickled down his forehead from a gash above his eyebrow, and he could taste copper in his mouth. His survival suit's medical systems indicated several cracked ribs and possible internal bleeding. Not immediately fatal, but bad enough that he wouldn't last more than a few days without medical attention. He finally freed himself from the pilot's seat and stumbled toward the emergency hatch. The ship's hull had buckled during impact, jamming the primary exit, but the emergency release still functioned. With a hiss of escaping atmosphere, the hatch blew open, and Marcus fell out onto cold stone. The air outside was breathable, though it carried a strange metallic tang that made his teeth ache. The gravity was lighter than Earth standard, allowing him to stand despite his injuries. Around him stretched what must have once been a magnificent city. Spires of black stone reached toward a sky painted in shades of deep purple and orange, while intricate bridges connected floating platforms that defied gravity. But everything was dying. Marcus could see it in the way the stone seemed to crumble at the edges, how the floating platforms listed to one side as if their ancient power sources were finally failing. Even the mist itself appeared diseased, swirling in patterns that hurt to watch for too long. He activated his suit scanner, hoping to find some kind of shelter or perhaps abandoned technology he could use to repair his communications array. The readings were strange, massive energy signatures that fluctuated wildly, as if something incredibly powerful was struggling against its own dissolution. Following the strongest signal, Marcus made his way deeper into the ruins. His boots crunched on crystalline debris that might once have been decorative elements. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of incredible artistry now falling to ruin. Fountains that had once sprayed liquid starlight now dripped a substance that looked disturbingly like blood. Statues of beings with elongated features and graceful builds watched his passage with empty eyes. The energy signature led him to a massive structure at the city's heart, a palace or temple built from what looked like solidified shadow. Its walls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's temperature as he approached its entrance. The doors stood open, revealing corridors that stretched beyond the range of his suit's lights. Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to stay away, but the scanner insisted that whatever was generating those energy readings lay somewhere in the building steps. If he was going to survive long enough for rescue to arrive, assuming rescue was even possible, he needed to find power sources and shelter. He stepped inside. The corridors were impossibly vast, with ceilings that disappeared into darkness above. His footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being stretched and twisted by the architecture itself. Along the walls, more of those shifting symbols provided a faint source of light, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Marcus paused. In rhythm with his heartbeat? He placed a hand against the wall and felt a subtle vibration, as if something deep within the structure was responding to his presence. The medical scanner on his wrist began beeping rapidly, detecting biosigns that made no sense according to its programming. He followed the energy signature deeper into the structure, through chambers filled with artifacts he couldn't begin to understand. In one room, he found what looked like a star map, but the constellation shown bore no resemblance to any part of space he knew. In another, shelves held books written in flowing script that seemed to move across the pages even as he watched. Finally, the signature led him to a chamber at the structure's very heart. Marcus stepped through an archway of twisted metal and stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The room was circular, its walls covered in those same glowing symbols. But it was what lay at the chamber's center that made him forget his injuries, forget his predicament, forget everything except the impossible beauty before him. A figure lay on what could only be described as an altar, though it was more like a bed carved from a single massive crystal. She was tall and elegant, with features that belonged in classical sculptures, high cheekbones, full lips, skin pale as starlight. Her hair was silver white, spread across the crystal like spilled moonlight, and she wore robes of deep blue that seemed to contain distant galaxies. But she was dying. Marcus didn't need his medical scanner to tell him that, though its readouts confirmed what his eyes could see. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, her skin almost translucent. Dark veins were visible beneath its surface, spreading outward from what looked like wounds on her throat and wrists. Whatever she was fading fast. He approached carefully, noting how the energy readings spiked with each step he took. The symbols on the walls pulsed brighter, and he could have sworn he heard something like music at the very edge of his perception, a melody that spoke of loss and longing and the slow erosion of hope. The scanner on his wrist began producing readings that shouldn't have been possible. The being on the crystal altar registered as alive, but her biosigns were unlike anything in its database. Her heart rate was nearly non-existent, her body temperature far below what should have been survivable, yet somehow she continued to breathe. Marcus found himself reaching out, drawn by an impulse he couldn't explain. His fingers brushed against her forehead, and her eyes snapped open. They were violet, deep and ancient, and, for a moment Marcus felt as if he was falling into them. Then, she spoke, and, though the words were in no language he recognized, their meaning filled his mind with absolute clarity. "You are not of the blood." Her voice was like distant thunder, weak but still carrying an echo of immense power. "Yet you have come. Why do you disturb my passing?" Marcus swallowed, suddenly, aware that he might have made a terrible mistake. "I crashed," he said, though he wasn't sure she would understand. "My ship. I was looking for shelter, for power sources. I didn't know anyone was here." She studied him with those violet eyes, and Marcus felt as if she was seeing not just his physical form but something deeper, his thoughts, his memories, his very soul. "Human," she said finally, and there was surprise in her voice. "I have heard of your kind. Young and brief, yet touched with something that older races have forgotten." Her hand moved slightly, fingers trembling with the effort. "I am Lyralii of the Nixai, last daughter of the Crimson Court. And I am dying." The matter-of-fact way she said it made Marcus's chest tighten. "Maybe I can help. I have medical supplies in my ship." "No." Her voice was firm despite its weakness. "The blood of my line has finally run its course. For 3,000 of your years, I have felt it weakening, thinning, becoming less than what it was meant to be. Now it can sustain me no longer." Marcus looked at the symbols on the walls, which were definitely pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat now. "This place, it's connected to you somehow, isn't it?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Clever. Yes, this is my heart shrine, bound to my essence since I was a child. As I fade, so too does it, and, with it, the last remnant of our civilization." She closed her eyes for a moment, and, when she opened them again, they seemed dimmer. "Perhaps it is fitting. We grew proud and distant, forgetting that even immortal blood can stagnate. Maybe it is time for the Nixai to join the other dead races in history's forgotten corners." "That's bullshit." The words came out before Marcus could stop them, rough and angry in the chamber's ethereal atmosphere. Lyralii's eyes widened in surprise. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I don't mean to be disrespectful. But I've seen too many good people die, and I'm tired of watching the universe take things away just because it can." He gestured at the chamber around them. "Look at this place. Look at what your people built. You're telling me all of that is just going to disappear because of thin blood? You do not understand, then, explain it to me." Marcus moved closer to the crystal altar, ignoring the way his ribs protested. "You said my people were touched with something older races had forgotten. What did you mean?" Lyralii was quiet for a long moment, her breathing growing shallower. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Hope. Stubborn, foolish, impossible hope. You cling to life and fight against fate even when logic says surrender. It is why the other races both fear and dismiss you. Marcus felt something click into place in his mind. Your blood is failing because it's been isolated too long. Inbred. Stagnant. But what if it wasn't isolated anymore? What are you suggesting? Instead of answering with words, Marcus pulled out his survival knife and drew it across his palm. Blood welled up, bright red against his pale skin. My people have a saying, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. Sometimes family isn't about what you're born with, it's about what you choose. Lyreliai's eyes fixed on the bleeding cut with an intensity that made Marcus's skin crawl. You would offer your blood freely? To one of the Nyx High? If it would save you? Yeah. You do not know what you suggest. Our blood bonds are not mere transfusions. They create connections that last beyond death itself. To mingle your essence with mine would tie your fate to my own for all eternity. Marcus looked at her, this impossible, beautiful being who spoke of eternity as if it were a burden rather than a gift. Around them, the chamber was growing dimmer as she grew weaker, and he could almost feel the weight of all that lost history pressing down on them. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, he said quietly. Before she could protest, he pressed his bleeding palm against her lips. The effect was immediate and electric. Lyreliai's eyes blazed with sudden light, and the symbols on the walls flared so brightly that Marcus had to squeeze his eyes shut. He felt something flow out of him, not just blood but something deeper, something that made his very bones ache with loss. But, at the same time, something flowed back into him. Ancient knowledge, memories that weren't his own, and a sense of connection so profound it made his knees weak. He saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the dance of stars across eons of time, and, through it all, the steady pulse of blood that carried not just life but consciousness itself. When the light faded, Marcus found himself on his knees beside the altar, his hand still pressed against Lyreliai's mouth. But she was no longer the pale, dying figure he'd found. Her skin had regained its luminous quality, her breathing was strong and steady, and, when she looked at him, her violet eyes held a depth that seemed to contain entire galaxies. What have you done? She whispered, but there was wonder in her voice rather than anger. Marcus tried to answer but found he couldn't form words. The connection between them was overwhelming, he could feel her heartbeat as if it were his own, sense her thoughts like whispers at the edge of his mind. And, underneath it all was a bond that felt as permanent and unbreakable as gravity itself. The blood recognizes you, Lyreliai said, sitting up on the crystal altar with fluid grace. It sings with new strength, new possibilities. But, Marcus Chen of Earth. She spoke his name though he was certain he'd never told it to her. Do you understand what you have given me? What you have condemned yourself to? He looked at her, at this being of impossible beauty and ancient power who now carried something of his essence within her, and realized that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. I saved you, he said finally. That's all that matters right now. Lyreliai's laugh was like silver bells, but there was something almost predatory in the sound. Saved me? Oh, my brave, foolish human. You have done far more than that. You have claimed me, and, in doing so, you have ensured that I will never, ever let you go. The transformation of Lyreliai was nothing short of miraculous. Where moments before she had been a dying whisper of her former self, she now moved with the fluid grace of a predator awakening from a long sleep. The chamber around them responded to her revival, the symbols on the walls burning brighter, the very air humming with renewed energy. Marcus struggled to stand, his legs shaking from more than just his injuries. The blood bond had changed him too, though in ways he didn't yet understand. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds carried layers of meaning he'd never noticed before, and there was a constant awareness of Lyreliai's presence in his mind, not intrusive, but undeniably there, like a warm flame in a cold room. The connection grows stronger, Lyreliai observed, rising from the crystal altar with impossible elegance. Your essence mingles with mine, and mine with yours. Can you feel it, Marcus Chen? The way your heart now beats in harmony with mine? He could, and it was terrifying. Every emotion she felt echoed through him, every thought cast shadows in his own mind. But, more disturbing was how right it felt, as if some part of him had always been incomplete until this moment. This is what you meant by eternal bonds, he said, flexing his hand where he'd cut it. The wound had already healed, leaving only the faintest trace of a scar. One aspect of it. Lyralii approached him slowly, her movements hypnotic in their grace. The blood of the Nixhai does not merely sustain life, it preserves it, enhances it, claims it.
You will find that you are no longer entirely human, Marcus Chen.
The bond has awakened dormant potential in your genetics, capabilities your species possesses but rarely accesses. As if to prove her point, Marcus suddenly became aware of every living thing within a substantial radius. His crashed ship's emergency power core pulsed like a mechanical heart. Small creatures scurried through the ruins outside, their life signs as clear to him as if he could see them directly. And, through it all, Lyralii's presence blazed like a star, beautiful and terrible and utterly consuming.
"What have you made me?" he asked, though part of him already knew he didn't really want to know the answer. "What you chose to become."
Her violet eyes held no mercy, but also no malice.
"A bondmate. A companion whose fate is now inextricably linked to mine. Where I go, you will follow. What threatens me, threatens you. And what I desire."
She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell something like cinnamon and starlight on her skin. "What I desire, you will find yourself compelled to provide." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature.
"You're talking about slavery. Am I?" Lyralii tilted her head, considering.
"You gave your blood freely.
You chose to bind your fate to mine.
And, in doing so, you gave me something more precious than life itself, hope for my people's future."
"Tell me, Marcus Chen, what is slavery to you?" He thought about it, really thought about it. Slavery was about removing choice, about making someone else's will paramount over your own.
But, even now, with alien blood flowing through his veins and an impossible being standing before him, he still felt like himself. Changed, enhanced, but not controlled.
This isn't slavery, he realized aloud. It's symbiosis. Lyralii's smile was radiant. Now you begin to understand. The bond does not enslave, it complements.
Your human stubbornness and adaptability, my ancient knowledge and power.
Together, we are far more than either of us could be alone.
The philosophical implications would have to wait, because at that moment, Marcus's enhanced senses detected something that made his blood run cold.
Ships, multiple ships, descending through Valthera's atmosphere.
Their energy signatures were familiar, Zephyrian cruisers, the same ones that had shot him down. "We have company," he said, turning toward the chamber's exit. Lyralii was already moving, her enhanced senses having detected the threat even before his own.
"The Zephyrians."
Her voice carried a note of contempt that seemed to make the air itself recoil.
"Scavengers and tomb robbers.
They must have tracked your ship's crash site." "They're probably here for salvage," Marcus said, checking his sidearm. The weapon felt different in his hands now, lighter, more responsive, as if his enhanced reflexes had improved his connection to it.
"My fighter has some classified tech they'd love to get their claws on. Let them come."
Lyralii raised her hand, and the chamber's symbols flared with sudden light. "This is my domain, and I have not fed in centuries. Perhaps it is time to remind the galaxy why the younger races once feared the Nixhai." Marcus caught her arm as she moved toward the exit.
"Wait. How many of them are there?"
She paused, her enhanced senses reaching out to probe the approaching ships.
3 cruisers, approximately 200 warriors. They are already deploying to the surface. 200?
Marcus shook his head. "I don't care how powerful you are, those aren't good odds."
"You doubt me?"
There was amusement in her voice, but also something colder. "I don't doubt your power," Marcus said carefully.
"But I've been fighting these bastards for months. They don't take chances, and they don't fight fair. If they're coming here in force, it means they've done their homework."
As if to prove his point, a new sound reached their ears, the distinctive whine of Zephyrian energy weapons powering up.
Moments later, the ruins outside erupted in brilliant flashes as the invaders began systematically destroying anything that might harbor defenders. They're not just here for salvage, Marcus realized.
They're here to finish the job. To make sure I don't survive to report what I've seen.
Lyralii's expression darkened. "Then, they have made a grave error.
This world is under my protection, as are you."
She moved toward the chamber's entrance with lethal purpose. "Come, bondmate.
It is time for you to see what the blood of the Nixhai can truly accomplish." They moved through the palace corridors with supernatural speed, Lyralii leading the way with predatory grace while Marcus struggled to keep up with his newly enhanced but still adjusting physiology. The bond between them had created a kind of tactical awareness he'd never experienced. He could sense her intentions before she acted, anticipate her movements, coordinate with her as if they'd been fighting together for years rather than minutes. The first group of Zephyrian soldiers they encountered was sweeping through the palace's lower levels, their reptilian features twisted with the usual mixture of greed and cruelty that made them such effective raiders. They had energy rifles and tactical armor, everything they needed to deal with conventional threats. They were not prepared for Lyralii. She struck like a force of nature, moving so fast that Marcus's enhanced vision could barely track her. One moment she was beside him in the shadows, the next, she was among the soldiers like a whirlwind of death. Her hands moved with surgical precision, finding pressure points that dropped armored warriors instantly. When one of them tried to bring his rifle to bear, she simply looked at him, and the weapon fell from nerveless fingers as the soldier collapsed, his eyes rolled back to show only whites. It was over in seconds. 6 Zephyrian soldiers lay unconscious or possibly dead on the ancient stone floor. Efficient, Marcus commented, though he felt a chill at how effortlessly she dispatched trained warriors. I was being gentle, Lyralii replied. The blood bond requires that I protect what is mine, but it does not demand cruelty. These soldiers are merely following orders. Their commanders, however. Her violet eyes flashed with promise. Their commanders chose to threaten what I have claimed. They continued through the palace, encountering more groups of soldiers. Marcus began to understand the tactical situation as they moved. The Zephyrians had deployed in a standard search pattern, systematically clearing each level before moving deeper into the structure. It was a sound strategy against conventional defenders, but it left them vulnerable to the kind of predatory hunting that Lyralii employed. She moved like liquid shadow, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Marcus found himself serving as both spotter and coordinator, his human tactical training combining with his enhanced senses to guide her attacks and anticipate enemy movements. The bond between them made verbal communication unnecessary. A thought, a glance, a subtle shift in stance was enough to coordinate their actions. By the time they reached the palace's main entrance, they'd disabled or killed nearly 30 soldiers without raising an alarm. But Marcus knew that wouldn't last. The Zephyrians were disciplined fighters, and when the search teams failed to report in, the commanders would know something was wrong. They'll call an orbital bombardment, he warned as they took position overlooking the entrance courtyard. Once they realize there's active resistance, they'll just glass the whole site from orbit. Let them try. Lyralii's smile was all teeth. This palace has withstood far worse than anything these children can devise. As if summoned by her words, the air above the courtyard shimmered, and a massive shape descended through the mist. It was a Zephyrian command ship, built like a flying fortress and bristling with enough firepower to level a city. Marcus felt his heart sink as he recognized the vessel's distinctive markings. That's the Void Talon, he said. Flagship of Admiral Keshtar. He's their best tactician, and he's got a personal grudge against humans. The ship settled into the courtyard with ponderous grace, its landing struts crushing ancient stonework. Moments later, its loading ramp descended, and Marcus felt his blood run cold as he saw what emerged. Admiral Keshtar was everything that made the Zephyrian Empire feared throughout the galaxy. Nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that gleamed like polished steel and eyes like chips of amber ice, he moved with the controlled aggression of an apex predator. But it was what accompanied him that made Marcus's enhanced senses scream warnings. Battle mechs. 6 of them, each one a walking arsenal designed to crack fortified positions. And, behind them, a full company of Zephyrian shock troops in powered armor. Now we have a problem, Marcus muttered. Lyralii's response was to laugh, a sound like silver bells that somehow managed to carry the promise of violence. Do we? How long has it been since I faced a true challenge? She turned to him, her violet eyes blazing with anticipation. Tell me, my bondmate, how much do you trust me? Marcus looked at her, this impossible being who had already turned his life upside down in the space of an hour. The smart thing would be to retreat, to find another way off this planet, to avoid a confrontation with an entire Zephyrian battle group. But, as he watched Admiral Keshtar barking orders to his troops, Marcus felt something stir in his chest, not fear, but anger. They shot me down, he said slowly. Hunted me like an animal. And, now they're here to desecrate your people's tomb. He met her gaze squarely.
I trust you. What do you need me to do?
Lyreliai's smile was radiant and terrible.
Nothing, my brave human.
Simply watch and learn what it means to be bound to the blood of the HFY. She stepped out onto the palace's main balcony, her voice carrying easily across the courtyard despite speaking barely above a whisper.
Admiral Keshtar of the Zephyrian Fifth Fleet. You trespass on sacred ground. The effect was immediate.
Every weapon in the courtyard swung toward her position, energy rifles humming to life and mech targeting systems locking onto her graceful figure. But Admiral Keshtar raised a clawed hand, his tactical mind already working. Princess Lyreliai, he said, his voice a harsh rasp that carried clearly in the thin air.
The death legends spoke true. The last daughter of the Crimson Court still draws breath. You know me?
Lyreliai seemed genuinely surprised.
I know what you represent.
Keshtar's amber eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity.
The final obstacle to Zephyrian dominion over this sector.
Your people's technology, their knowledge of hyperspace manipulation, their genetic libraries, all of it has remained beyond our reach because of you.
As it should.
Lyreliai's voice carried new weight now, authority that made the very air seem to thicken. The HFY achieved immortality through discipline and sacrifice. Your people seek only to plunder and consume. Perhaps. Keshtar gestured, and his mechs began advancing toward the palace entrance.
But we are here now, and you are alone. Surrender, and I will ensure your death is swift. Alone? Lyreliai's laugh echoed across the courtyard. Oh, Admiral. You have made a fundamental error in your intelligence gathering.
She gestured, and Marcus stepped into view beside her. He could feel the bond between them humming with power now, his enhanced senses reading the tactical situation with crystalline clarity. 6 mechs, 47 soldiers in powered armor, 1 command ship with orbital bombardment capability. Under normal circumstances, impossible odds. But, as Lyreliai's hand found his, Marcus realized that normal circumstances had ceased to apply the moment he'd chosen to save her life. I am no longer alone, Lyreliai declared, her voice carrying across the courtyard like a pronouncement of doom.
I have found my bondmate, Admiral Keshtar.
And he has given me something your people will never understand, hope for the future. The air around them began to shimmer as Lyreliai drew upon power that had been sleeping in her veins for centuries. Through their bond, Marcus felt some of that power flow into him, changing him in ways that went beyond mere physical enhancement.
Last chance, Princess, Keshtar snarled.
Surrender now, or I will reduce this entire site to slag. Try, Lyreliai whispered, and her voice carried despite the distance.
But, know this, Admiral, you are no longer hunting a dying remnant of a fallen civilization.
You are facing the first of a new bloodline, one that carries the best of both our peoples. She squeezed Marcus's hand, and he felt power rush through him like liquid fire.
And we will not be as merciful as I might have been alone.
The battle that followed would be remembered across 3 star systems as the moment everything changed in the balance of galactic power.
Admiral Keshtar's response to Lyreliai's defiance was swift and brutal.
The 6 battle mechs opened fire simultaneously, their plasma cannons turning the palace balcony into an inferno of superheated energy. The shock troops followed suit, their rifles adding streams of coherent light to the devastating barrage. Marcus felt every instinct scream at him to dive for cover, but Lyreliai stood motionless beside him, her hand still clasping his. The energy beam struck something invisible 3 feet in front of them and simply stopped, as if hitting an impenetrable wall. Energy absorption, she said calmly, as if discussing the weather rather than surviving enough firepower to level a city block.
One of our more useful evolutionary adaptations.
The HFY fed on stellar radiation for millennia before we learned to process blood. Artificial energy sources are quaint. Through their bond, Marcus felt her drawing power from the bombardment itself, each plasma bolt and energy beam only making her stronger. The knowledge that flowed into his mind was staggering. The HFY hadn't just evolved to survive in space, they'd learned to thrive on the very forces that would destroy other species.
Admiral Keshtar seems confused, Lyreliai observed with amusement.
Indeed, the Zephyrian commander had stopped the barrage and was barking orders at his troops, his tactical mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. Energy shields won't hold forever, Marcus pointed out, though even as he said it, he could feel through the bond that Lyreliai was nowhere near her limits.
True.
But we're not going to simply stand here and absorb fire all day.
Lyreliai's smile was predatory.
You wanted to see what the blood bond could accomplish, my dear Marcus.
Allow me to demonstrate.
She raised her free hand, and Marcus felt power flow out of her and into the very structure of the palace around them. The ancient symbols carved into the walls blazed with renewed light, and somewhere deep in the building's foundations, systems that had slumbered for centuries began to awaken. The first sign of what was coming appeared as a subtle vibration in the stone beneath their feet. The Zephyrian soldiers noticed it too, their heads turning in confusion as their tactical displays began registering massive power buildups from multiple sources. Impossible, Admiral Keshtar snarled into his communicator. Intelligence said this world was dead.
There shouldn't be any active technology here.
Your intelligence was correct, Lyrelii called down to him. This world was dead. But death, Admiral, is merely another state of being, one that can be reversed under the right circumstances.
The vibrations intensified, and cracks began appearing in the courtyard's ancient stone.
But, instead of indicating structural failure, the cracks revealed something that made even Marcus gasp in surprise. Light was bleeding up from below, not the harsh, artificial illumination of modern technology, but something organic and alive. The city's neural network, Lyrelii explained, her voice tight with concentration as she channeled power through systems that hadn't functioned since before humans had invented agriculture. Every Nixai settlement was built around a living core, a hybrid of biological and quantum computing systems.
When I began to fade, the city entered dormancy to conserve power for my revival. And, now?
Marcus asked, though he was beginning to understand.
Now it wakes.
Her violet eyes blazed with triumph. And it remembers why it was built, to protect the blood of the royal line against all threats. The courtyard erupted.
What emerged from the cracks in the stone defied easy categorization.
They looked like plants at first glance, crystalline growths that twisted upward with organic grace. But, as they continued to rise, Marcus realized they were something far more sophisticated. Each tendril was lined with energy conduits, and, at their tips, focusing arrays that hummed with barely contained power.
Defensive turrets, he guessed. Among other things. Lyrelii's smile was becoming genuinely frightening.
The Nixai were pacifists by choice, not weakness. When forced to fight, we fought to win.
Admiral Keshtar apparently reached the same conclusion.
All units, fall back to minimum safe distance, he roared. Prepare for orbital bombardment. But, even as his forces began their tactical withdrawal, the crystalline growths completed their emergence. There were dozens of them now, ringing the courtyard and extending deep into the ruins beyond. Their energy signatures were unlike anything in Marcus's experience, not the crude plasma technology most species favored, but something that seemed to bend the laws of physics themselves.
Gravitational manipulation, Lyrelii said, answering his unspoken question.
We learned to weaponize spacetime distortion.
Much more efficient than simply throwing energy at a problem. The first volley from the awakened city defenses was almost too subtle to see. The air around the retreating Zephyrian mechs simply shifted.
Gravity vectors twisted, local spacetime curved in impossible ways, and the massive war machines found themselves falling upward, their pilots screaming as their inner ears tried to process conflicting gravitational inputs. Marcus watched in fascination and horror as one of the mechs was caught in what looked like a localized tornado of twisted space. The machine was torn apart not by force but by differential gravitational stress, different parts of its structure experiencing completely different directions of pull.
We need to move, Lyrelii said suddenly, her expression becoming urgent.
Keshtar is calling for orbital bombardment.
Even awakened, the city's defenses can't stop a full fleet bombardment.
They raced through the palace corridors as the sounds of battle echoed from outside. The awakening city was defending itself with terrible efficiency, but Marcus could see through their bond that Lyrelii was pushing herself to her limits.
Controlling the vast neural network required enormous amounts of power, even with the energy she'd absorbed from the initial attack.
There, she said, pointing to a section of corridor where the symbols on the walls pulsed with particular intensity. The central command node. From there, I can coordinate the city's full defensive capabilities. The node turned out to be another crystal chamber, this one filled with flowing streams of light that connected to a central throne-like structure. Lyrelii settled into it with obvious relief, her consciousness immediately expanding to encompass the entire settlement. Through their bond, Marcus felt a taste of what she was experiencing. Awareness spread across miles of ruins, sensors that could detect everything from individual heartbeats to stellar radiation, weapons systems that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself.
It was overwhelming and magnificent and terrifying all at once. Incoming!
Marcus shouted as his enhanced senses detected the energy buildup from orbit.
The bombardment, when it came, was everything Admiral Keshtar's reputation promised.
Particle beams capable of cracking continental plates lanced down from orbit, turning sections of the ruins into molten glass. Kinetic projectiles followed, massive tungsten rods accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The city's response was immediate and devastating. Gravitational fields deflected the particle beams, bending their paths so that they struck empty ground instead of vital structures. The kinetic projectiles simply vanished, caught in localized black holes that appeared and disappeared in microseconds. But Marcus could feel the strain on Lyralii through their bond. Each defensive action cost her, and there were limits to even Nick's high endurance.
"This isn't sustainable," he said.
"They can bombard us from orbit indefinitely.
Then, we don't give them the chance." Lyralii's voice carried new determination.
"The city has weapons as well as shields, Marcus. Weapons that have been sleeping for 3,000 years, waiting for a target worthy of their power." She gestured, and Marcus felt her consciousness reach out to touch systems buried deep beneath the planet's surface.
Ancient missile silos opened, revealing projectiles that looked more like works of art than weapons of war.
But the energy readings they generated made Marcus's enhanced senses real.
"Singularity torpedoes," Lyralii explained.
Each one carries a contained black hole. When they detonate, they create localized gravitic anomalies that can tear apart even the most heavily shielded vessels. The first torpedo launched with a sound like reality tearing. It accelerated not through conventional propulsion but by manipulating spacetime itself, creating a gravity well that pulled it toward its target at impossible speeds. Admiral Keshtar's flagship tried to evade, but you can't outrun a black hole. The torpedo detonated precisely amidships, and, for a moment, the massive vessel was stretched like taffy as differential gravitational forces tore it apart from the inside out. The explosion, when it finally came, lit up Valthera's sky like a new sun. "One down," Lyralii said with grim satisfaction. "But the others are already jumping to hyperspace." Marcus felt a mixture of triumph and concern. They'd won this battle, but at what cost? The energy expenditure required for the city's awakening had left Lyralii visibly drained, and he could sense through their bond that many of the ancient systems were already beginning to fail again.
"Can the city sustain itself?" he asked.
"For a time." Lyralii rose from the command throne, swaying slightly.
"But not indefinitely."
The neural network was designed to support a living civilization, not a single individual.
"Without more of the blood to sustain it."
She shrugged. "It will sleep again, and eventually fade completely. Then, we need to get off this world," Marcus said. "Find other survivors of your people, or at least somewhere safe to figure out our next move."
"Our next move?" Lyralii's smile was weary but genuine.
"You still think in terms of next moves, as if this is simply another tactical problem to solve.
Isn't it?"
"Oh, my dear, practical human. You have bound yourself to the last princess of a dying race. There is no next move for us, there is only the long, slow work of rebuilding an empire that once spanned a quarter of the galaxy." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature.
"You want to restore the Nyx High Empire?"
"I want to ensure that what my people learned and built doesn't die with me."
Lyralii's violet eyes held depths of determination that made Marcus realize just how far out of his depth he was. "The knowledge we possessed about hyperspace manipulation, biological enhancement, gravitational engineering, it could revolutionize galactic civilization. But it will die with me unless I can find a way to pass it on." "And the blood bond is part of that?"
"The blood bond is the key to everything." Lyralii moved closer to him, her presence warm and hypnotic. Traditional Nyx High reproduction was a careful process of genetic selection and enhancement that took centuries. But your blood has shown me another way, a faster path that could create new bloodlines in decades rather than millennia. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place in his mind, and he didn't like the picture they formed.
"You want to turn humans into vampires?"
"I want to save both our peoples," Lyralii corrected. "Humanity is young and adaptable but lacks the knowledge to reach its true potential. The Nyx High possess that knowledge but lack the genetic diversity to survive.
Together we could create something new," Marcus finished.
"A hybrid civilization that combines the best of both species."
Now you understand. Lyreliai's smile was radiant.
And you, my bondmate, would be the first of a new bloodline, the patriarch of a race that could reshape the galaxy itself. Marcus looked at her, this impossible, beautiful being who spoke of reshaping civilizations as casually as others might discuss the weather. Part of him was terrified by the scope of her ambitions. But, another part, a part that was growing stronger as their bond deepened, was exhilarated by the possibilities she offered. The Zephyrians will be back, he said finally. With bigger fleets and better intelligence. If we're going to do this, we need allies. Resources. And time to figure out how to make it work. All true. Lyreliai nodded approvingly. Which is why our first priority must be to reach my people's hidden archives. There are facilities throughout this sector, cloaked repositories of knowledge and technology that even the younger races haven't discovered. How do we get there? My ship is a wreck, and I'm guessing you don't have a spare starship lying around. Lyreliai's laugh was like music. My dear Marcus, you're thinking like a human again. The Nixai didn't build ships to travel between stars, we became the ships. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding throughout the city. His enhanced senses immediately detected the source, more ships dropping out of hyperspace, a lot more ships. The Zephyrian response fleet, Lyreliai observed calmly. Admiral Keshtar must have transmitted a full tactical analysis before we destroyed him. They'll come prepared this time. Marcus looked at the displays showing dozens of capital ships taking position around Vaelthera. The city won't survive another bombardment like that. No, Lyreliai agreed. It won't. Which means it's time for us to leave. She moved to another section of the control chamber and placed her hands on a crystal panel that immediately blazed with light. Around them, the palace began to change. Walls flowed like water, restructuring themselves into new configurations. The very foundations of the building shifted as ancient mechanisms awakened for the first time in millennia. What are you doing? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew. Preparing for departure, Lyreliai said simply. Did you think my ancestors built this palace simply as a dwelling? It was always intended to be far more than that. Through the chamber's crystal walls, Marcus watched in amazement as the entire structure began lifting free of the planet's surface. What he'd taken for a palace was revealing itself to be something far more sophisticated, a living ship capable of interstellar travel. Hold on, my bondmate, Lyreliai said, her hands dancing over controls that seemed to respond to her thoughts as much as her touch. Our real journey is just beginning. The palace ship's ascent through Vaelthera's atmosphere was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. There was no roar of engines, no violent acceleration that pressed him into his seat. Instead, the vessel seemed to simply will itself into motion, reality bending around it as gravitational fields carried them smoothly away from the planet's surface. Through the crystal walls of the command chamber, Marcus watched the Zephyrian fleet scramble to respond. Their tactical formation, perfectly designed to bombard a stationary target, dissolved into chaos as commanders tried to process what they were seeing. Energy weapons lanced out toward the ascending palace, but the beams simply curved away, deflected by gravitational fields that treated the laws of physics more as suggestions than absolute rules. They're trying to establish a pursuit course, Marcus observed, his enhanced senses tracking the enemy fleet's movements with crystalline clarity. Let them try. Lyreliai's hands moved across the control interface with fluid grace, her consciousness merged so completely with the ship's systems that it was sometimes difficult to tell where she ended and the vessel began. This ship was built by a civilization that had mastered interstellar travel before your species had invented the wheel. The Zephyrians' crude technology cannot hope to match it. To demonstrate her point, she engaged what Marcus could only think of as a hyperdrive, though it bore no resemblance to the hyperspace technology he was familiar with. Instead of tearing a hole in spacetime and diving through it, the palace ship seemed to simply step sideways out of normal reality. One moment they were surrounded by the Zephyrian fleet, the next, they were alone in the cosmic void between stars. Quantum phase shifting, Lyreliai explained, noting his confusion. We're still in the same physical location, but operating on a different dimensional frequency. The Zephyrians can search all they like, from their perspective, we've simply vanished. Marcus was beginning to appreciate just how far ahead of everyone else the Nixai had been. Why didn't your people use this technology to defend themselves? If you could do this, how did your civilization fall? Lyreliai's expression darkened. Because power without purpose leads to stagnation, and stagnation leads to decay. My people became so focused on perfecting their immortality that they forgot why immortality was worth having. They withdrew from the galaxy, spending centuries in contemplation while younger races developed their own technologies and ambitions. She gestured to the display showing their course through hyperspace, or whatever this phase-shifted realm was called. When the Zephyrians first began their expansion, the Nyx High Council voted not to interfere. When the hegemony started enslaving entire species, we chose isolation over intervention. We had achieved perfection, they reasoned, and the struggles of lesser races were beneath our notice. And you disagreed? I was young then, barely past my third century, and full of what my elders called dangerous idealism. I argued that immortality without purpose was just elaborate suicide. That our duty as an advanced species was to guide and protect those who came after us. Lyraliai's laugh was bitter. The council exiled me to the outer territories for such radical thinking. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions through their bond: pain, anger, regret, but also a fierce determination that reminded him why he'd been drawn to save her in the first place. And, while you were in exile, your people continued to decline? The blood grew thin through isolation and inbreeding. The neural networks that sustained our cities began to fail. One by one, the great palaces went dark, their inhabitants choosing to enter voluntary stasis rather than face the reality of their civilization's decline. She turned to face him fully, her violet eyes blazing with purpose. By the time I returned to offer my help, it was too late. I was the only one left who remembered what we had once been and, more importantly, what we could become again. The ship's course through phase space brought them to a region of space that looked empty to conventional sensors. But, as Lyralii made subtle adjustments to their dimensional frequency, structures began to materialize around them, vast crystalline constructions that put even the palace ship to shame. "Welcome to Nexus Station," Lyralii said with obvious pride. "The greatest of the Nyx High archives, and the repository of 3 million years of accumulated knowledge." The station was impossibly beautiful, its crystal spires arranged in patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles Marcus couldn't even begin to comprehend. Energy flowed through its structure in ways that made his enhanced senses real, and, at its heart was something that looked like a captured star. The central archive, Lyralii explained as she guided their ship toward a docking bay that appeared to have been designed specifically for palace ships. Every significant discovery, every technological breakthrough, every philosophical insight achieved by the Nyx High, all of it preserved here in quantum crystalline matrices. As they docked, Marcus felt a subtle change in the air around them. The station's atmosphere was rich with something that made his blood sing, not oxygen, but something far more sophisticated, designed to enhance rather than merely sustain life. "The station is still active?" he asked. "Maintained by automated systems and a few die-hard archivists who chose preservation over stasis." Lyralii stood from the control throne, her movements betraying a weariness that spoke to the enormous effort required to pilot the palace ship. They'd been waiting for someone with royal blood to return and give their work meaning. They were met at the airlock by beings who were clearly Nyx High but different from Lyralii in subtle ways. Taller, more ethereal, with features that seemed to shift between corporeal and energy forms. Their leader, a figure whose age was impossible to determine, approached with what Marcus recognized as a formal greeting despite never having seen it before. "Princess Lyralii," the figure said, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Marcus's bones. "The archive rejoices in your return." "But..." Its gaze shifted to Marcus, and he felt as if he was being examined on a molecular level. "You bring with you one who carries the blood but is not of the blood. How is this possible?" "This is Marcus Chen of Earth," Lyralii said, her tone carrying unmistakable authority. "My bondmate and the first of a new bloodline. Through him, the future of our people is assured." The effect of her words on the assembled archivists was electric. Marcus felt their attention focus on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl, but also with a hope that was almost overwhelming in its intensity. "The prophecies spoke of such a possibility," the leader murmured. "The starborn child, who would carry the blood but transcend its limitations. We had thought it mere fantasy." "The blood recognizes truth wherever it finds it," Lyralii replied. "Marcus gave his essence freely to save my life, and, in doing so, proved that the future lies not in isolation but in synthesis." They were led through corridors that defied architectural logic, their walls alive with flowing information that Marcus could somehow read despite never having learned the language. The knowledge contained in the archive was staggering: technologies that could reshape matter at the atomic level, philosophical frameworks that treated consciousness as a fundamental force of nature, artistic expressions that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously.
This is what you want to share with humanity?
Marcus asked as they passed through a chamber where holographic displays showed the rise and fall of a dozen galactic civilizations. This is what I want to share with our children, Lyralii corrected. The blood bond we share is just the beginning, Marcus. With the knowledge contained here, we can create a new form of existence, one that preserves the best of both our peoples while transcending the limitations of each. They reached the heart of the archive, a spherical chamber whose walls were lined with crystalline matrices that contained more information than the entire human internet. At its center floated a construct that looked like a flowering tree made of pure light, its branches reaching out to connect with data streams throughout the station.
The synthesis engine, Lyralii explained. The most advanced computational system ever created.
It can model genetic combinations across thousands of generations, predict the outcomes of evolutionary changes, and design new forms of life with precision down to the molecular level. Marcus felt a chill as the implications hit him.
You want to use this to plan our children's genetics?
I want to use this to ensure our children represent the best possible synthesis of human adaptability and Nixai knowledge.
Lyralii moved to a control interface that seemed to respond to her presence before she even touched it. The traditional approach to bloodline enhancement took centuries of careful breeding.
We don't have centuries, Marcus. The galaxy is changing, younger races are developing technologies that could threaten everything we hope to build. We need to accelerate the process. The synthesis engine came to life at her touch, its branches of light extending toward both of them. Marcus felt tendrils of energy probe his genetic structure with a thoroughness that was both fascinating and terrifying.
Remarkable, the engine spoke, its voice a harmony of pure mathematics.
The human genome contains latent capabilities that have never been properly activated.
Combined with Nixai genetic templates, the potential offspring would represent a quantum leap in evolutionary development.
Holographic displays blossomed around them, showing possible genetic combinations and their predicted outcomes. Marcus saw children who could survive in space without protection, who could manipulate matter through pure will, who could live for millennia while retaining human emotional depth and creativity. They would be gods, he whispered. They would be what both our peoples could become, Lyralii corrected. But only if we're willing to take the first step. Marcus studied the projections, his enhanced intellect grappling with concepts that would have been beyond human comprehension just hours ago. The children shown in the displays were beautiful, powerful, and utterly alien to anything that had ever existed.
What about choice? He asked finally. These children would be engineered from birth to be something beyond human or Nixai. Do they get a say in what they become? Did you get a choice in being born human?
Lyralii countered.
Did I get a choice in being born Nixai?
Every parent shapes their children's genetics through their choices, Marcus.
We would simply be more deliberate about it.
There's a difference between natural selection and deliberate engineering.
Is there?
Your species has been modifying itself since it first learned to use tools.
This is simply the next step in that evolution.
Marcus was quiet for a long moment, weighing the magnitude of what they were discussing. Around them, the archive hummed with the accumulated wisdom of millions of years, all of it waiting to be unleashed on an unsuspecting galaxy.
What about consent? He asked. From humanity, I mean.
You're talking about changing the fundamental nature of our species.
Don't we deserve a say in that? Lyralii's expression softened. You're thinking like a human again, my bondmate.
Concerned with democracy and consensus when we're discussing the survival of two civilizations.
But.
She paused, considering. Perhaps there is wisdom in that approach. The archive contains detailed records of species that tried to force evolution on unwilling populations. The results were rarely positive.
So what do you suggest? We start small.
Find others who would choose the bond willingly, humans who understand what we offer, Nixai survivors who recognize the necessity of change. Build a community that can serve as an example of what synthesis can achieve. The plan that emerged from their discussions with the archive's archivists was ambitious but achievable. They would use the station as a base to locate both human settlements that might be receptive to their message and the hidden enclaves where other Nixai survivors might have taken refuge. The palace ship would serve as their mobile embassy, carrying the promise of transformation to those willing to listen. It could take decades to build a sustainable population, the chief archivist warned. And there are forces in the galaxy that would oppose such changes. The established powers have invested too much in the current order to allow a new species to emerge unchallenged. Then, we'll have to be stronger than they are, Marcus said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. The bond has already changed me in ways I'm still discovering.
What will we become after generations of synthesis?
Something the galaxy has never seen before, Lyralii said, her violet eyes blazing with determination. Something worthy of the legacy both our peoples have left us. As they prepared to depart the archive, Marcus felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. He'd come to this remote world as a fighter pilot trying to survive a war. He was leaving as the patriarch of a new species, bonded to a princess whose ambitions span millennia. The blood bond pulsed between them, carrying promises of transformation that both thrilled and terrified him. But, as he looked at Lyralii, seeing the hope and determination that burned in her ancient eyes, Marcus realized that he wouldn't trade this impossible future for all the simple certainties of his past.
They were going to change the galaxy.
The only question was whether the galaxy was ready for what they would become. One more thing, Lyralii said as they returned to their ship. The bond between us will continue to evolve as we grow stronger together. Eventually, the distinction between your thoughts and mine may become meaningless.
Marcus considered this. You're warning me that I might lose my humanity? I'm warning you that you might transcend it.
Her smile was radiant and terrible.
The question is, are you prepared for that transformation?
Marcus looked out at the crystalline spires of the archive, at the captured star that powered technologies beyond human comprehension, at the future spreading out before them like an infinite web of possibilities.
Ask me in 100 years, he said.
5 years had passed since Marcus Chen first touched down on the dying world of Valthera, and the galaxy had begun to take notice of the changes rippling outward from the forgotten corners of space. The palace ship drifted in the shadow of a gas giant, its crystal spires reflecting the swirling aurora of charged particles that danced around the massive planet's magnetic field. But this was no longer the same vessel that had fled the Zephyrian bombardment. Time and the bond between Marcus and Lyralii had transformed it into something far more sophisticated, a living synthesis of human ingenuity and Nixai biotechnology. Marcus stood in what had once been the command chamber, though it now bore little resemblance to the sterile control room he remembered. The walls pulsed with organic patterns that responded to his thoughts, neural pathways that connected his consciousness directly to the ship's systems. He no longer needed to touch controls or read displays, the vessel had become an extension of his will, just as he had become an extension of its purpose. The transformation in him was complete now, 5 years of gradual change having reshaped him into something that was neither fully human nor entirely Nixai. His hair had taken on the silver white of Lyralii's, his eyes now held flecks of violet that seemed to glow in dim light, and his lifespan had been extended to centuries rather than decades. But, more than the physical changes, it was his expanded consciousness that truly marked his evolution, an awareness that encompassed not just his own thoughts but the collective knowledge of everyone who had joined their growing community. The convoy from New Terra has arrived, Lyralii announced, her voice carrying both excitement and apprehension. She materialized beside him in a shimmer of displaced air, her mastery of matter manipulation having reached levels that seemed magical even by Nixai standards.
200 volunteers, including 37 families with children.
Marcus felt her emotions through their bond, hope mixed with fear, determination tempered by the weight of responsibility.
Each human who chose to undergo the transformation represented both a victory and a risk.
The process wasn't dangerous, but it was irreversible, and not everyone adapted to the changes as smoothly as he had. Any word from the hegemony, he asked, though he already knew the answer through their link.
Their response fleet departed Proxima Station 3 days ago.
Admiral Chen sends his compliments and his regrets. Apparently, your sister is quite persuasive when she wants to be.
Marcus smiled at that. Sarah had been one of the first to volunteer for transformation when they'd made contact with human settlements 6 months ago.
The reunion had been emotional and complicated. She'd aged 5 years while he'd become something beyond human, but the bond of family had proven stronger than the changes that separated them.
She's leading the diplomatic mission to the Council of Worlds next week, he said. If anyone can convince them that we're not a threat to galactic stability, it's her. Are we not a threat? Lyralii asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. We're proposing to fundamentally alter the nature of biological existence.
To create a new form of consciousness that transcends the limitations both our peoples have always accepted.
It was a fair question.
Their community now numbered in the thousands humans who had chosen transformation, Nixai survivors who had emerged from hidden enclaves to join them, and the first generation of true synthesis children born from the union of both bloodlines. Each new member added to their collective knowledge and capability, creating a network of consciousness that was becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. The children especially were remarkable. Born with capabilities that surpassed anything either parent species had achieved alone, they could manipulate matter and energy with the ease of thought, communicate across vast distances through quantum entanglement, and process information at speeds that put the archive's computational systems to shame. "We're not a threat," Marcus said finally. "We're evolution in action. The question is whether the established powers will see it that way." Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from the ship's sensor network. New contacts were approaching through hyperspace, a lot of them, moving in formation and broadcasting Zephyrian military codes. The response fleet, Lyralii observed, her expression hardening. "Admiral Keshtar's successor has finally worked up the courage to face us directly." Marcus felt his own combat instincts awakening, enhanced by 5 years of synthesis and integration. He could sense the approaching ships as clearly as if he was standing on their bridges: 7 heavy cruisers, 2 dreadnoughts, and a command carrier that carried enough firepower to glass a planet. "They're not here to talk," he said, noting the aggressive formation and the energy buildup from weapons systems. "No," Lyralii agreed. "The Zephyrian Empire has decided we represent an existential threat to their expansion plans. They mean to end us here and now." The enemy fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their massive vessels taking position to surround the gas giant and cut off any escape routes. Marcus felt a familiar mixture of fear and anticipation as he prepared for battle, but this time was different. He wasn't alone in a damaged fighter, desperate and outgunned. This time, he had power. The palace ship responded to his will, its organic systems awakening with predatory enthusiasm. Gravitational manipulators came online, quantum phase generators spun up to operational frequency, and deep in the vessel's heart, the synthesis core that powered their most advanced weapons began to sing with barely contained energy. "Attention, unregistered vessel," came the broadcast from the Zephyrian command ship. "You are in violation of Imperial Decree 347 Alpha, prohibition against unauthorized genetic manipulation. Surrender immediately for processing, or face the consequences." "Processing," Marcus murmured. Such a pleasant euphemism for genocide. "They fear what we represent," Lyralii said, her hands dancing over control surfaces that responded to her touch like living things. "A future where their military superiority means nothing, where biological evolution has moved beyond their ability to control or exploit." Marcus opened a communications channel to the Zephyrian fleet, his enhanced voice carrying across the void with crystalline clarity. "This is Marcus Chen, formerly of the Terran Defense Corps. You're intruding in neutral space and threatening civilian populations. Withdraw immediately." The response was immediate: a barrage of plasma fire from all 9 enemy vessels, enough concentrated energy to vaporize a small moon. But the palace ship was no longer bound by the limitations of conventional physics. It simply stepped sideways through dimensional space, allowing the bombardment to pass harmlessly through the volume where it had been. "Impressive," came Admiral Vexkar's voice from the command ship. "But parlor tricks won't save you from Imperial justice. All ships, deploy quantum scramblers. Don't let them phase shift again." The Zephyrians had learned from their predecessors' mistakes. The quantum scramblers would lock local space into normal dimensional parameters, preventing the palace ship from using its most effective defensive capability. But Marcus and Lyralii had learned too, and the vessel they commanded now was far more than a simple transport. "Show them," Marcus said quietly. Lyralii's smile was radiant and terrible as she released the ship's true nature. The crystalline structure began to flow and reshape itself, revealing configurations that had been hidden for 5 years of preparation. Weapon ports opened along graceful curves, energy conduits blazed to life throughout the hull, and, at the vessel's heart, the synthesis core reached full operational power. The first shot from their primary weapon was almost too beautiful to be deadly. A stream of coherent gravitational force lanced out across space, striking the lead Zephyrian cruiser with precision that spoke to computational capabilities beyond anything the attackers possessed. The enemy vessel simply came apart, its structure unable to withstand differential gravitational stress as various sections experienced completely different directions of pull. "Impossible," Admiral Vexkar's voice cracked with disbelief. "Intelligence said they had 1 ship, minimal defensive capabilities.
Intelligence was wrong, Marcus broadcast back. We are no longer what your analysts expected to find. The battle that followed was less a conflict than a demonstration.
The Pallas ship moved through space like a dancer, its enhanced capabilities making the Zephyrian fleet's attack seem crude and clumsy by comparison. Gravitational weapons tore apart enemy vessels, quantum disruptors disabled their electronics, and matter manipulation fields simply reached out to reconfigure hostile weapons into harmless debris. But Marcus took no joy in the destruction.
Each enemy ship represented hundreds of lives, soldiers following orders in service to an empire that feared what it couldn't understand.
Through the bond he shared with Lyralii and the growing network of transformed consciousness, he felt the weight of every death. It doesn't have to be this way, he broadcast to the surviving enemy vessels.
The transformation we offer isn't a threat, it's an opportunity.
Join us willingly, and discover what both our peoples could become together.
Never. Admiral Vexcar's response was immediate and fierce. The Zephyrian Empire will not bow to genetic aberrations and evolutionary freaks.
We'll destroy you all before we let your corruption spread. The Admiral's ship launched what looked like a standard missile barrage, but Marcus's enhanced senses detected something different about the weapons, a quantum signature that spoke of technology far beyond normal Zephyrian capabilities. Temporal weapons, Lyralii said, her voice tight with concern.
They're trying to erase us from the timeline itself.
The missile struck not the Pallas ship's current position but points in spacetime where it had been moments before, creating cascading paradoxes that threatened to unravel causality itself. But the synthesis core that powered their vessel was designed for far more than simple energy manipulation. It could process quantum probability matrices and navigate temporal distortions with the same ease it handled gravitational fields. The Pallas ship rode the temporal shockwaves like a surfer riding an ocean wave, its consciousness-guided systems adapting to each paradox before it could fully manifest.
Around them, spacetime twisted and, reformed as competing timeline tried to assert dominance. Where did they get temporal weapons?
Marcus asked through gritted teeth as he fought to maintain their position in normal time.
The hegemony, Lyralii replied.
They must have formed an alliance, pooled their technologies against us. The older races are finally taking us seriously as a threat.
The realization was both gratifying and terrifying.
Their small community of transformed beings had grown powerful enough to attract the attention of galactic superpowers, but that also meant they would face opposition beyond anything they'd prepared for.
We need to end this, Marcus said.
Before they bring in reinforcements with even worse weapons.
Agreed. But how do we stop them without becoming the monsters they already believe us to be?
The answer came not from either of them but from their ship itself, or rather, from the collective consciousness that now guided its systems. The voices of thousands of transformed beings whispered through their bond, offering a solution that was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of destroying the remaining enemy vessels, they would transform them. The Pallas ship reached out with tendrils of directed evolution, biological fields that could rewrite matter at the molecular level. But, instead of targeting the ships themselves, they touched the crews, not to harm them but to offer them the same choice Marcus had been given 5 years ago.
What are you doing?
Admiral Vexcar's voice carried new uncertainty as his bridge crew began reporting impossible sensor readings.
Giving you an opportunity, Marcus replied. The same opportunity one was given. The chance to